The room froze the moment his voice cut through the air, sharp, dismissive, dripping with arrogance. In Arabic, the billionaire muttered an insult he believed was safely hidden behind a language no one else in the restaurant could understand, especially not the young black waitress standing quietly beside him. But what he didn't realize was that every word he spoke was landing exactly where he never intended it to, because she understood him, completely, fluently, and the moment she responded, the world he'd built around himself would begin to crumble. But before we get to the instant that made a billionaire go pale, ask yourself this. What makes a man with everything fear someone society often overlooks? Why did a simple phrase in Arabic hit him like a punch to the chest? And what hidden truth connected him to a waitress he'd never met, yet instantly despised? This story isn't just about rudeness, it's about the borders people draw to feel superior, the walls they build to hide their past, and the second those walls start showing cracks, he thought money was a shield. He believed language was a weapon only he could wield. He assumed no one in this room could ever challenge him. But she wasn't intimidated, not even a little. She lifted her eyes, steady and calm, and replied to him in the same language he used to belittle her. Her words flawless, precise, and powerful enough to silence the entire room. That moment wasn't just a twist. It was the ignition point of everything that followed. And when you learn why her response shook him so deeply, you'll understand why his world collapsed. She was never meant to be invisible, but in a world that judged her before it listened to her, she learned early that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Long before she ever stepped into a uniform and carried plates through a crowded restaurant, she lived a life shaped by pressure, resilience, and a determination powerful enough to bend her future back into her own hands. She grew up in a tiny apartment where money was stretched like thin paper and every bill felt heavier than the last. The walls were thin, the neighborhood unpredictable, and her mother exhausted. But love filled every corner. Her mother was the kind of woman who believed two things with her whole soul: that dignity was non-negotiable, and that education could rewrite destiny. She drilled these beliefs into her daughter, not through strict rules, but through quiet sacrifices no one saw. That belief turned into the girl's lifeline. She devoured books the way some children devoured cartoons. Stories in different languages fascinated her because they made the world feel bigger than the one she grew up in. English came first, French followed, and then, almost by accident, Arabic appeared in her life through an elderly neighbor who lived 2 floors below. He was a retired teacher who carried wisdom in his voice and patience in his eyes. He noticed her curiosity and began teaching her simple phrases. What started as an after-school distraction grew into something much deeper. He told her stories of strength, culture, and identity, and he taught her one lesson she would never forget. Language is not just communication, it is protection, connection, and power. Learn it, and you can walk into any room without shrinking. She took his words seriously. She learned Arabic with a discipline usually reserved for people chasing medals or trophies. She filled notebooks with verbs, practiced pronunciation late into the night, and watched news broadcasts she barely understood at first. But with time, she became fluent, not just in words, but in the culture, the rhythm, the emotion behind them. It wasn't a school subject, it was a secret superpower. Still, superpowers didn't stop real life from hitting hard. When her mother fell sick, the world shifted. Hospital corridors became her second home, and medical bills piled up faster than hope. She applied for scholarships, tutoring jobs, anything that could ease the burden. But reality didn't wait. Reality demanded money now. That's how she ended up in the upscale restaurant. Polished floors, wealthy customers, and a constant reminder that she didn't belong there except as a server. Most days, she endured disrespect like it was part of the job description. People looked past her, talked over her, or treated her like background noise. She never reacted. She never cracked. She had learned control, the kind that grows when life forces you to be stronger than you feel. But the billionaire's insult wasn't like the others. It struck deeper, not because the words were cruel, but because they were spoken in the language she had worked years to master, the language connected to her childhood mentor, her identity, her pride. Hearing it used as a weapon against her felt like an old wound being reopened. Yet instead of shrinking, something inside her rose. She remembered the neighbor who had believed in her. She remembered her mother telling her that knowledge was armor. And in that split second before she responded, she realized she wasn't just defending herself, she was proving something. To him, to the room, and maybe even to herself. Her backstory wasn't a burden. It was the reason she stood tall. On the surface, the billionaire's life looked flawless. Private jets, penthouse suites, and investments scattered like chess pieces across continents. To the world, he was the definition of success. But behind every perfectly tailored suit was a man stitched together by insecurities he spent millions trying to silence. People admired his confidence, unaware it was merely armor. They envied his power, not realizing it was built on fear, not strength. He hadn't been born wealthy. He grew up in a cramped, volatile home where arguments erupted faster than hope could settle. His father was a man obsessed with dominance, harsh, demanding, impossible to please. Respect was something he demanded, never earned, and he punished anything that looked like vulnerability. The boy learned early that emotions were liabilities, that kindness was weakness, that power meant survival. Business became his escape. Numbers were predictable, balance sheets didn't yell, profit margins didn't judge. As he climbed the ladder of success, he believed he was leaving his past behind. One deal, one acquisition, 1-0 at a time. But the mindset his father carved into him stayed. He didn't want respect. He wanted control. He didn't build relationships. He built empires. Then came the chapter he never spoke about, the one tied directly to the language he used to insult the waitress. Before fame hardened him completely, he had fallen in love with a woman who changed everything. She was brilliant, fearless, and unapologetically herself. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had. She grew up speaking Arabic, and she taught him pieces of her language. Not as a lesson, but as a gift. Her world was rich with culture, family, and values that clashed sharply with the cold logic he had inherited from his father. For a while, he admired her fire, but admiration turned to fear when he realized she could see straight through him. To the wounded boy he tried so desperately to hide, she questioned his ruthlessness, confronted his ego, challenged his obsession with power. The more she pushed him to grow, the more he felt exposed. And exposed was the one thing he couldn't handle. During one argument, the kind fueled by truths he wasn't ready to face, he lashed out and used Arabic to insult her. The same language she had trusted him with, the language she had used to show him love, he weaponized it, and that was the night she walked away for good. Her absence haunted him more than he ever admitted. He told himself he didn't care, but every time he heard Arabic, a knot tightened in his chest. It reminded him of the one person he couldn't manipulate, intimidate, or buy, the one person who saw the cracks in his armor and refused to let him hide behind it. So he did what cowards do. He rewrote the past in his mind. He convinced himself that people who spoke that language were beneath him, as if dismissing the language itself could erase the guilt that clung to it. But guilt doesn't disappear, it waits, and when the waitress looked at him after he insulted her, calm, steady, unbroken, he felt that old guilt come roaring back, not because she looked like the woman from his past, but because she carried the same unshakable dignity, the same refusal to cower, the same ability to make him feel small without saying a word. In that moment, he didn't just see a waitress, he saw the truth he'd been running from. His past wasn't gone. It had simply been waiting for the right voice to awaken it. The restaurant was already buzzing with the low hum of dinner conversations, clinking glasses, and soft music. Yet everything shifted the moment the billionaire leaned back in his chair with that smug expression, the one that always preceded cruelty. He repeated the Arabic insult, louder this time, as if daring the room to react. A few diners glanced over, sensing tension, most ignored it. Conditioned to believe that people with wealth were allowed to misbehave. But she didn't flinch. The waitress stood still, holding her notepad loosely at her side, her posture calm but her eyes sharpened with clarity. For a moment, she simply breathed, grounding herself the way she had been forced to do countless times throughout her life. Then, in fluent, flawless Arabic, clear enough to slice through the thick air, she repeated his insult back to him, except this time, she added a sentence he never expected. "I wonder," she said, "why a man with everything still chooses to shrink himself with words." The entire table went silent, forks hovered midair, conversations died halfway through sentences, and the billionaire, who spent his entire life commanding rooms, looked like someone had pulled the floor from beneath him. His jaw tightened, his fingers dug into the edge of the table, his face drained of its usual arrogance and flushed with something far more human, fear. He tried to regain control. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped, switching back to English as if the language could restore his power. She nodded. "A man who thinks kindness is beneath him." A quiet gasp rippled through a nearby table. The billionaire's business partner, a tall man with silver hair, stiffened. He whispered urgently, "Leave it alone, this is not the place." But the billionaire was unraveling, his composure slipping through his fingers like sand. He stood abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Red liquid spread across the tablecloth like spilled anger. "You don't speak to me like that," he hissed. "You're a waitress." "And you," she replied calmly, "are a man who forgot respect." Someone started recording, then another, and another. Phones rose slowly around the room like a quiet rebellion. The billionaire noticed, his eyes darted around, panic rising, but the panic wasn't fueled by the humiliation. It was fueled by recognition, the waitress's steady presence, her strength, her refusal to shrink. It reminded him too vividly of the woman he had driven away years ago. The past was no longer a memory. It was standing right in front of him, wearing an apron instead of a dress, undeniable and real. "You don't know anything about me," he barked, voice cracking. She didn't raise hers. "I know enough." Her co-workers watched from the edge of the room, unsure whether to intervene or let justice take its natural course. Even the manager, usually quick to appease wealthy customers, froze, sensing that the usual rules no longer applied. The billionaire attempted to step closer, but his partner grabbed his arm. "Stop before you ruin everything," he warned under his breath. But it was too late. The room had already turned against him, not with aggression, but with something far more dangerous to a man like him: judgment. The waitress spoke again, her tone steady as stone. "You think speaking Arabic makes you superior, but you only learned it to hurt someone you once cared about. That's not power, that's cowardice." The billionaire's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words forming. He had no idea how she knew, but the truth hit him so hard that he staggered back a step. The entire restaurant held its breath. Finally, she took a step away from the table, not retreating, reclaiming her space. "I'll bring your check," she said softly. "It will be the only thing you control tonight." Laughter erupted, not mocking, but incredulous, a release of tension, a recognition of the moment's significance. The billionaire felt the walls closing in. Cameras were capturing everything. His partner's pale face said enough. This wasn't just a public embarrassment. This was damage, real damage, the kind of damage that couldn't be erased with money, fear, or PR spin. "Stop filming," he roared, but the command only made more phones rise. His voice cracked under the weight of the spectacle. He knew then. He had lost the room, and worse, he had lost the version of himself he pretended to be. When the waitress returned with the check, she placed it gently on the table, looked at him for a final moment, and said, not with anger, but with calm certainty, "Next time you decide to belittle someone, remember, languages belong to everyone, dignity does too." He didn't respond. He couldn't, because for the first time in years, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. And everyone saw it clearly tonight. By the next morning, the confrontation had already escaped the walls of the restaurant and exploded across the internet. Clips from a dozen different angles spread like wildfire. His voice, her response, the collective gasp of the room, all captured in perfect clarity. The billionaire's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Headlines called it arrogance, comment sections called it justice. And for the first time in his career, he had no way to control the narrative. His PR team scrambled, releasing statements that sounded hollow and rushed. He claimed the video was taken out of context. He insisted he didn't mean what he said, but the public wasn't buying it. People weren't reacting to the insult alone. They were reacting to the look in his eyes when she spoke back, the look of a man who wasn't just caught, but exposed. Within 48 hours, business partners began backing away. A major investor pulled out of a deal worth millions, citing concerns about conduct and ethics. A charity organization he sponsored publicly cut ties. Stockholders demanded an emergency meeting. For a man who built his empire on fear, the sudden shift in power felt like an earthquake, unavoidable and loud. Meanwhile, the waitress walked into her next shift to a standing ovation from the staff. Her manager, usually stiff and businesslike, looked at her with something close to awe. Customers who recognized her from a video asked to sit in her section, offering words of encouragement, support, and gratitude. Tips doubled, then tripled. But the attention was overwhelming. Reporters waited outside the restaurant. Influencers wanted interviews. Strangers messaged her with praise, with stories of their own experiences, with gratitude for her courage. She appreciated it, but she didn't crave the spotlight. Her goal had never been to go viral. It had been survival. And then, something unexpected happened. A woman arrived at the restaurant asking to speak with her. She introduced herself quietly, explaining that she had once been close to the billionaire. When she heard the waitress speak Arabic in the viral clip, she recognized the strength in her voice immediately. Tears filled her eyes as she confessed the truth. She was the woman from his past, the one he had hurt so deeply. She thanked the waitress, not for humiliating him, but for reminding the world that dignity could stand against cruelty and win. They talked for nearly an hour, sharing memories, sharing pain, sharing resilience. The waitress realized that what happened in the restaurant wasn't just about her reclaiming her power. It was about breaking a pattern that had gone unchallenged for far too many years. In the midst of all this came the biggest surprise of all. A prestigious language institute reached out after seeing her fluency in the viral footage. They offered her a full scholarship to complete her degree in linguistics, something she had put on hold when life became too heavy. They even offered her a part-time position as a cultural liaison while she studied. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten: possibility again. As for the billionaire, he didn't return to the restaurant. He stayed out of sight, surrounded by damage control advisors who couldn't fix what he broke within himself. The world moved on quickly, but he didn't. Shame has a long memory. In the end, the power he tried to wield over her became the force that reshaped her future, and the language he used to wound her became the very thing that opened new doors. Justice didn't scream. It didn't demand revenge. It simply arrived, with clarity, with consequence, and with undeniable truth. The story didn't end with a viral clip or the noise it created. Its real ending lived quietly in what happened afterward. Moments shaped not by anger, but by clarity. For the waitress, life didn't suddenly become effortless, but it finally felt like it was moving in a direction she controlled. Possibility replaced fear, hope replaced exhaustion, and the future she once paused slowly began to return to her, piece by piece. She stayed at the restaurant a little longer, not because circumstances forced her to, but because she wanted to finish on her own terms. Each shift felt different now. Instead of being ignored, she was acknowledged. Instead of being overlooked, she was respected. People didn't treat her like a viral sensation. They treated her like a person whose strength had reminded them of their own. The woman from the billionaire's past stayed in touch as well. Their quiet connection became something meaningful, built not on shared suffering but on shared resilience. It proved that strength can echo across years and lives, reaching places neither of them expected. And the billionaire. The world moved forward, as it always does, but the weight he carried did not. Some truths follow you until you face them. Whether he ever changed was no longer her responsibility. Some stories don't need perfect redemption, they only need closure. In the end, what mattered wasn't the confrontation, the cameras, or the chaos. It was the moment she chose to rise. The moment she responded not with anger, but with clarity. The moment she proved that dignity doesn't need wealth, status, or permission, it only needs courage. Her story stands as a reminder. The smallest voice can shift the largest room, and the quietest strength can break the loudest arrogance. If you want more powerful stories like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel.